Hey my friends, what's going on? I'm back with another video, and today let's talk about how to best set up your GoPro Hero7 Black for filmmaking. And with that, let's jump right into the video. The first time you turn on your GoPro Hero 7, you have to go through the initial setup. Choose your language, agree to the terms and conditions, turn on GPS if you want that, and then connect it to your iPhone or Android phone. And once done, you are greeted by a new interface, which in my opinion is a welcome change. The previous version, in my opinion, was rather dated and not necessarily easy to control. Now it is way more intuitive, and let's have a look at how it works. You can swipe across the screen in order to switch between default modes. We have a photo mode, a video mode, and a time-lapse mode. Or you can tap on the icon in the lower left corner to switch between the modes, but you can also see the subcategories. Today we want to set up our GoPro Hero 7 Black for video, so let's go into the video mode and let's have a look at the settings. At the top from left to right we have our resolution and frame rate settings. We can choose the field of view, turn on auto low light and stabilization, and then we have the ProTune menu, which we'll have a look at in just a second. Now let's start with the resolution and with the frame rates and have a look at what different options we have. On the left we have the resolution, on the right the frame rates, below you see the different options that you have for either of them, but very interestingly now in the upper right corner we can also change the aspect ratio. It seems in the age of social media 4:3 is making a comeback, especially for your Facebook and Instagram feeds. We however want to shoot movies that you can watch on YouTube or even better on your television, so we go with the standard, which is 16:9. Same thing, left the resolution, right the frame rate, below you see the different options that you have, and then an indication as to which settings support hyper smooth stabilization. One of the key selling features of the new GoPro Hero 7 Black, which I'm sure everyone wants to use, so keep an eye on this one. Now you may be tempted to jump right into 4K, but please note in 4K, especially in the higher frame rates, the GoPro Hero 7 Black shoots in HEVC, which stands for High Efficiency Video Coding, which is nothing else than the H.265 video codec. So you want to make sure that your smartphone or operating system is supporting that codec, otherwise you end up with footage that you can't edit, so please be aware. Now the great thing is the GoPro Hero 7 Black supports video stabilization in 4K up to 60 frames per second, unlike previous versions. However, not all the fields of view are available in that resolution or frame rate. So what resolution and frame rate you choose will be somehow dictated by the field of view that you want to be shooting in. Now in 4K and 60 frames per second, as you can see, the only field of view that is your option is wide, which is the standard field of view for your GoPro. Wide is a rather large field of view that also introduces a fisheye effect or barrel distortion, which I don't mind if I only shoot with the GoPro. If I mix my footage, however, with footage that I shot with my other cameras, barrel distortion is something that I really like to avoid. Now if we drop the frame rate to 30 frames per second, we get another option, which is Super View, which is an even wider field of view, essentially super fisheye, which I can only recommend if you're into action sports, let's say you're on your mountain bike or your skateboard, but otherwise for everyday videos I think it's super distracting and not a field of view I can recommend. Now this is why I'm shooting in 2.7K, because usually I'm exporting a 1080p timeline, so 2.7K still gives you a lot of options and flexibilities in post, but it also allows for a third field of view that we'll have a look at in just a second. In terms of frame rates, I go with 24 frames per second because all my cameras are set that way, and 24 frames per second give you that cinematic look that I'm usually going for. And depending on what you're after, in 2.7K you can shoot up to 120 frames per second for buttery slow motion, which is quite remarkable for a small camera like this. And now when we go back to fields of view, you can see a third option, which is linear. Linear is a more mid-ranged field of view, but still pretty wide, and here the camera removes that fisheye effect that you're getting from the other fields of views, which gives you a more natural look. If you're mixing footage with footage of your other cameras like I do, it's definitely the field of view I would be going for. If the barrel distortion isn't a concern for you, you can happily go with 4K and higher frame rates. Just make sure that your smartphone or your operating system is supporting these video files, the codec and the larger file size. Auto low light essentially allows the GoPro to lower the frame rate if you're shooting in higher frame rates in order to let more light to the sensor. Since we are shooting already in a lower frame rate, which is 24 frames per second, this option isn't available to us. Video stabilization I leave at auto because why wouldn't I? Everyone loves smooth and stable footage, and if I have the option I'll definitely keep it turned on. Now ProTune allows for more manual control over our footage, so we can adjust the color, the ISO limits, the exposure. In order to get the best possible results, we'll turn this on. Now as you can see, we have additional options that allow us to fine-tune our settings. First of all, shutter speed. I keep that at auto because I want the camera to have some flexibility to adjust the shutter speed to changing lighting conditions. If you want to set your shutter speed manually, however, the rule of thumb is a shutter speed should be twice of your frame rate. In our example here, 48. Exposure value compensation allows for manually adjusting the auto exposure in harsh lighting conditions, when your shot is slightly too bright or too dark. I leave that at 0 for now and make the adjustments only when I need it. Next, we have a look at the white balance, and here the GoPro does a fairly good job with choosing the right white balance, at least in daylight that is. If you, however, want to have more control over the look of your footage, and especially at night, I recommend to choose the white balance manually or do what I do here and go with native. Native is only a minimally color corrected file from the image sensor that allows for more flexibility in post when you color grade your footage. Next, we have a look at the ISO settings. An ISO essentially determines the sensitivity of your sensor to light. The higher the ISO, the more sensitive is the sensor, which is good for low light conditions. However, the higher the sensitivity, the more noise is added to the image. So setting the ISO is always a balancing act between low light capabilities of the camera and how much noise you are willing to accept in your footage. I usually keep the minimum ISO at 100, but I lower the maximum ISO to 800 because I prefer a clean image. And only if absolutely necessary, I go higher to 1600. But I wouldn't recommend to go beyond that because the image becomes too noisy and, in my opinion, unusable. Next, we have a look at sharpness, and by default sharpness is set to high, which in my opinion is way too much because it makes the footage almost look unnatural. So I prefer to set sharpness to low and add sharpness as needed in post. Next, we choose the color profile, and here you have essentially two options to choose from: GoPro and flat. GoPro is an already color processed image with a lot of contrast and saturated colors, which is great if you want to use your footage right off the camera. Flat, however, is a more neutral color profile, which allows for capturing more details in the highlights and the shadows due to its longer curve, which makes it easier to color grade the footage in post. So if you're after a certain look, and especially if you want to mix your footage with the footage that you shot with your other cameras, I would definitely recommend to go with flat. Next, let's have a look at raw audio, where you can specify whether you need a separate WAV file and how much processing the GoPro should apply to it. Low means minimal processing, which is great if you want to process the audio file yourself in post. Medium applies the manual audio controls, wind versus stereo, which we'll have a look at in just a second. And high means full processing, similar to the audio track that is saved with your video file. I never use raw audio because in my opinion, if you have specific needs for your audio track, go and get yourself an external audio recorder. They are not really expensive and the results are much better. Last but not least, we have the microphone settings, where you can switch between wind and stereo mode. Wind if you're outside and you want to eliminate that wind noise, stereo for inside to get the full stereo sound. Or you just leave it at auto and let the GoPro decide. I barely use the audio that the GoPro records because, to be honest, it isn't that great, which is why I don't bother and just leave it at auto. So this is it. These are my settings for shooting video with the GoPro, especially for color grading the footage in post. However, if you're not into color grading and you want to have a much quicker workflow where you use the footage right off the camera, let me show you how to adjust the settings real quick. First, we turn the white balance back to auto and let the GoPro decide what white balance to choose. Just a tip, if you're shooting at night, choose the white balance manually, you will be getting much better results. Sharpness we set from low to medium, and again, don't use high, it really doesn't look that good. And for the color settings, we go with GoPro instead of flat, because that gives you a nicely processed image and it doesn't require any color grading in post. And these are my recommended video settings if you don't want to color grade your footage in post, which should allow you to just take the videos and photos of the GoPro, do a quick edit either on your computer or your smartphone and just post it on social media or share it with your family and friends. Now before I let you go, let's have a quick look at the preferences because there are a couple of settings that I can recommend you to adjust. First, under the General tab, we want to turn down the beep volume. I'd rather not have them, and especially if you want to be more discreet, all these beeps can be really annoying, so I turn these off. Same thing for the LEDs, and especially if you want to be more discreet, having all these LEDs can be really distracting. So either you turn them off entirely if you don't need them, or as a compromise you can only turn off the front LED, which leaves you with one LED right next to the display, which gives you an indication whether you're shooting video or not. And then finally, in order to save some battery life, I recommend to turn down the brightness of the display. Because if you don't shoot outside in bright daylight, you don't have to have that display run at 100% all the time, and even at 50% or below, it gets the job done quite nicely. So this is it, my friends. This is how to best set up your GoPro Hero 7 Black for filmmaking, and I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or feedback, as always, you just leave a comment down below. And with that, I'll catch you guys in my next video.